The moment the bathroom door swung open, Ethan Cole's world fractured into before and after. His hands still gripped the formula bottle knuckles white against the plastic, while his brain scrambled to process the impossible geometry of a stranger occupying space that should have been empty. The woman stood motionless before the cracked mirror, water dripping from dark hair that clung to shoulders too thin beneath a soaked shirt. Her reflection caught his eyes first. Hollow sockets rimmed in red skin stretched tight over cheekbones that jutted like accusations. Then she turned and recognition flickered across features he had seen somewhere, sometime in a life that felt suddenly very far away. The formula bottle hit the floor. Milk splattered across linoleum already stained by years of negligence and poverty. Ethan's throat closed around words that refused to form. His feet welded to the threshold, while his mind fired through possibilities, intruder, hallucination, ghost. The woman's lips parted, releasing a question so quiet it barely disturbed the stale air between them. "Do you remember me?" Lily's voice pierced through the paralysis, her small call for daddy echoing from the bedroom they shared. The woman's face drained of what little color remained, pupils dilating with something beyond fear. Her hands rose in a gesture of surrender or pleading, fingers trembling so violently they blurred at the edges. The words tumbled out in a desperate whisper, each syllable cracking under its own weight. "Please don't let her see me. Please." 3 weeks earlier, Ethan had been a different man. Not better, not worse, just different in the way that ignorance shields people from understanding how quickly everything can disintegrate. He had driven his delivery van through Portland's rain-slicked streets, hauling packages up concrete stairs that smelled of urine and defeat, his lower back screaming protests that had become white noise. The routes never changed. The boxes grew heavier each month, or perhaps his body simply grew weaker. At 34, he moved like a man, twice his age, joints grinding through motions that paid $9 an hour after taxes. The apartment complex on Southeast Morrison Street rose 6 stories of water-stained brick and peeling paint, a monument to dreams deferred and promises broken. Ethan's unit sat on the 4th floor, accessible via an elevator that worked 3 days out of 7. On bad days, he carried Lily up the stairs, her backpack bouncing against his spine, while she sang songs learned at school, oblivious to how each step cost him. On worse days, she walked beside him, her small hand tucked into his, chattering about classmates and teachers and the infinite concerns of 6-year-old existence. The studio measured 320 square feet, every inch colonized by the necessities of survival. Lily's narrow bed occupied the eastern wall, surrounded by stuffed animals arranged in hierarchies only she understood. His futon unfolded nightly mere feet away, close enough that her breathing became the metronome by which he measured his own rest. The kitchenette consisted of a 2-burner stove, a mini-fridge that hummed like a dying insect, and 18 inches of counter space where he performed culinary miracles with rice, beans, and whatever vegetables the discount grocer marked down on Thursday afternoons. Morning routines had calcified into ritual. 5:30 brought the alarm's electronic shriek, silenced before it could wake Lily. Ethan would rise in the darkness, his body protesting every movement, and begin the choreography of breakfast preparation. Toast browning while eggs scrambled in a pan inherited from his mother, now dead 6 years. Coffee brewing in a machine held together by duct tape and stubbornness. Lily's lunch assembled with surgical precision, sandwich cut diagonally because she insisted triangles tasted better, apple slices in a plastic container, string cheese crackers, and always a note scrawled on whatever paper he could find. "Today you will be amazing," one had read. "The world is lucky to have you," claimed another. "You make Daddy proud every single day." Simple words, repeated themes, but Lily collected them in a shoebox beneath her bed, treasure more valuable than anything he could afford to buy. Some mornings, when the weight of exhaustion and inadequacy pressed too heavily, he would find her reading through old notes, lips moving silently as she absorbed encouragement he had written months or years prior. Those moments justified everything. 6:15 meant waking Lily, his hand gentle on her shoulder, voice soft in her ear. She would surface from sleep gradually, eyes fluttering open to reveal irises, the color of summer sky. Her hair, impossibly blonde and perpetually tangled, would stick up at angles that defied physics. He would carry her to the bathroom, help her wash face and brush teeth, then dress her in whatever clothes the laundromat had returned clean. Breakfast together at the folding table that served every function from dining to homework station. Her questions cascaded without pause. Why is the sky blue? What happens to rain after it hits the ground? Do ants have feelings? Can we get a dog someday? Ethan answered what he could, deflected what he couldn't, and marveled at the inexhaustible curiosity contained in 42 pounds of human. 7 o'clock brought the walk to Hawthorne Elementary, 6 blocks through neighborhoods that grew incrementally safer with each street crossed. He held her hand the entire way, scanning parked cars and shadowed doorways with vigilance born from stories he heard other parents whisper. Lily skipped beside him, backpack, bouncing voice lifting in songs about animals and letters and numbers. At the school gate, she would turn to hug him, her arms barely reaching around his waist. He would crouch to her, level hands on her shoulders, and deliver the same instructions every morning. Be kind, be brave, be yourself. Then she would run toward the building, blonde hair streaming behind her, and he would watch until she disappeared through doors painted a cheerful yellow that probably looked different when your childhood wasn't shadowed by poverty. Only then would he return to the van fire, the engine that coughed, smoke the color of bad decisions, and begin the route that would occupy the next 12 hours. The packages varied. The destinations remained depressingly similar. Apartment complexes where elevator doors opened to reveal walls tagged with gang symbols. Office buildings where security guards watched him like he might steal the furniture. Suburban homes where residents emerged to collect their deliveries without meeting his eyes, as if acknowledging him might somehow transfer his failure through simple contact. He hauled boxes up driveways and stairs, knocked on doors, or left items on porches, then retreated to his van before anyone could decide he looked suspicious. Lunch happened in the van, if it happened at all. A granola bar from the dollar store, water from a jug he refilled at gas station bathrooms. Sometimes he would park near a playground and watch children swing and climb, imagining Lily among them, her laughter rising above the others. She deserved better than the rusted swing set behind their apartment building, the one with chains that squeaked and seats that sagged. She deserved birthday parties at bounce houses, summer camps by lakes, dance lessons and art classes, and all the enrichment activities the school sent home flyers about, knowing full well that most families in their district couldn't afford such luxuries. The manufacturing plant where Ethan had worked for 8 years remained visible from certain delivery stops, its smokestacks rising above the eastern industrial zone like tombstones. He had been a technician there, skilled with his hands and quick with solutions when machinery failed. The work had been hard but honest, the pay sufficient to rent a 2-bedroom apartment in a better neighborhood. He had been making plans, saving money, thinking about community college courses that might lead to engineering credentials. Then the economy had shifted in ways economists explained on news programs he couldn't afford time to watch, and the plant had closed with 48 hours notice. Severance packages went to management. Workers received cardboard boxes and security escorts to the parking lot. For 3 months, Ethan had hunted for similar positions, his resume growing dog-eared from constant updating. Manufacturing jobs had evaporated. The few that remained demanded certifications he couldn't afford or experience with software systems that hadn't existed when he had been learning his trade. Unemployment benefits provided a buffer, but not a solution. The 2-bedroom apartment became unaffordable. He had downgraded to a 1-bedroom, then to the studio, each move stripping away another layer of the life he had been building. The delivery job had materialized when desperation peaked. No experience necessary, the ad had promised. Immediate start. He had signed papers without reading them, carefully discovered too late that he was classified as an independent contractor, which meant no benefits, no overtime, no protection beyond what he could negotiate with his own increasing irrelevance. But it was income, and income meant keeping Lily fed and housed and enrolled in school. Everything else was negotiable. Lily's mother had left when the baby was 4 months old. Ethan had come home from a night shift to find the apartment empty except for Lily sleeping in her crib, a note on the kitchen counter, composed of 3 sentences that rewrote his entire future. I can't do this. I'm not meant to be a mother. Don't look for me. He hadn't looked. Part of him understood that she had been drowning. That motherhood had arrived like a tsunami and swept away whoever she had been before. Part of him hated her with a fury that sometimes woke him in the night, hands clenched into fists, imagining confrontations that would never occur. Mostly he had simply adjusted. Bottles and diapers and sleepless nights, learning to burp a baby while researching childhood development on a library computer. Finding a daycare that accepted subsidized rates, then later a neighbor who watched Lily after school for cash under the table. Mrs. Chen lived 3 doors down, a widow in her 70s whose own children had scattered to distant cities. She had started watching Lily as a favor, then continued because, as she once told Ethan, the girl made the apartment feel less like a tomb. He paid her what he could, usually $80 a week, knowing it was far less than actual childcare costs, but more than her Social Security check provided in discretionary income. Mrs. Chen never complained. She would greet Lily after school with homemade cookies and Mandarin lessons, teaching her to count and recite basic phrases. Lily adored her, called her grandmother Chen, and drew pictures that decorated the old woman's refrigerator. Evenings were Ethan's favorite time, though they arrived only after he had driven home through traffic that transformed his van into a mobile prison, climbed stairs that left his knees aching, and collected Lily from Mrs. Chen's apartment. She would run to him, backpack forgotten on the floor, and wrap her arms around his legs. He would scoop her up, feeling her weight against his chest, breathing in the smell of her hair that always carried hints of whatever craft project had occupied the afternoon. "How was your day, sweetheart?" The question unleashed torrents of information. Who had said what at lunch? Which game had been played at recess? What story the teacher had read during circle time? Ethan listened to every word, asking follow-up questions, storing details about classmates he had never met but knew by reputation. Emma, who shared her crayons. Jason, who pushed on the playground. Ms. Rodriguez, who had the kindest smile and never yelled even when everyone was being loud. Dinner preparation became collaborative theater. Lily would stand on a chair beside him, stirring pots or arranging plates, her commentary continuous and cheerful. They would eat together at the folding table, her legs swinging beneath the chair because they didn't reach the floor, his body finally releasing tension accumulated through 12 hours of physical labor. Afterwards came homework, which at 6 years old consisted mainly of coloring sheets and simple math problems. Ethan would sit beside her, praising every effort, gently correcting mistakes without crushing confidence. Bath time at 7:30, Lily playing with plastic toys and water heated by a heater that clanked ominously. Pajamas at 8, teeth brushed until they gleamed, hair combed through tangles that made her squeal in mock agony. Then the ritual that justified every hardship, reading together on her bed, his body stretched out beside her smaller form book propped against raised knees. She would press against his side, her finger tracing illustrations, while he read aloud, performing voices for different characters, pausing when she interrupted with questions or observations. "Why does the bear want honey? Is the bear hungry like we get hungry?" "Yes, sweetheart, everyone gets hungry. Even rich people, even rich people." After the story prayers she had learned from Mrs. Chen, despite Ethan's own skepticism about divine intervention. Then lights out, her voice rising in the darkness. "I love you, Daddy. I love you more, Lily." Impossible, her standard response delivered with the confidence of someone who had never yet learned that love could be quantified, measured, found wanting. In the silence after she slept, Ethan would unfold the futon, his body collapsing onto a mattress that had lost all structural integrity years ago. He would set his alarm for 5:30, plug his phone into the charger, and close his eyes against thoughts of bills coming due. The van needing repairs, he couldn't afford Lily outgrowing shoes faster than he could replace them. Sleep arrived in fragments, disturbed by noises from neighboring apartments, arguments bleeding through walls, televisions at volumes suggesting hearing loss, footsteps overhead at 3 in the morning. But they were surviving. Some days that felt like victory enough. The woman had appeared in the neighborhood 3 weeks before the bathroom encounter, though Ethan's awareness of her had been peripheral at best. She existed as a shadow at the edges of his vision, someone glimpsed while unloading packages or walking Lily to school. Always alone, moving with a slowness that suggested either exhaustion or despair. Her coat looked insufficient for Portland's February chill, fabric thin enough that wind must have cut straight through. Her head stayed down, gaze fixed on sidewalk cracks. Posture collapsed inward as if she were trying to occupy less space in a world already crowded with people who had no room for her. Ethan had noticed her in the way city dwellers notice the homeless, with a mixture of sympathy and relief that their circumstances remained different. She wasn't aggressive, didn't panhandle, didn't shout at invisible enemies. She simply existed in public spaces, a ghost haunting a city that specialized in manufacturing ghosts. He had seen her sitting on bus stop benches long after buses had come and gone. He had passed her in the convenience store on the corner of Morrison and 21st, where she had stood before the bread aisle with the intensity of someone solving complex equations. That had been the day everything shifted, though he hadn't recognized it at the time. Ethan had stopped at the store after dropping Lily at school, needing coffee for the road ahead. The woman had been there when he entered frozen before shelves of bread priced from 99 cents to $4 per loaf. Her hand had risen toward the cheapest option, then fallen back to her side. She had checked her pockets, fingers emerging with coins that glinted in fluorescent lighting. Her lips had moved silently, counting, calculating, deciding. Something in her stillness had reached across the space between strangers and taken hold of Ethan's attention. He had watched her choose a granola bar from an adjacent shelf, one of the generic ones that tasted like sawdust, compressed into edible form. She had carried it to the counter with the coins clutched in her palm, her eyes not quite meeting the cashier's face. The transaction had cost $1.06. She had been short by 19 cents. The cashier, a teenager with acne constellations across both cheeks and the dead eyes of someone working over night shifts, had stared at her with the patience of stone. "You're short." "I know, I'm sorry. Just the granola bar then." "That's $1.06. You don't have $1.06. The woman's hand had returned to her pocket, searching for coins that didn't exist. Her other hand had clutched the counter-edged knuckles white with the effort of remaining upright. Ethan had seen her throat work, swallowing what might have been tears or words, or simply the acknowledgement of how completely she had fallen through the cracks of society's safety net. He had stepped forward, without conscious decision, his body acting before his brain could construct reasons why getting involved was a bad idea. His hand had emerged from his jacket with a sandwich, already made turkey and cheese from the deli section, plus a bottle of water. He had set both on the counter beside her granola bar, then added a $5 bill. "Ring these up together." The woman had turned to stare at him, her eyes widening with something between disbelief and suspicion. Ethan had offered a smile he hoped looked kind rather than pitying, though he suspected the distinction was invisible to someone whose circumstances had stripped away the luxury of distinguishing between the two. Everyone has bad days. Things will get better. He had paid before she could protest, collected his own coffee, and left the store while her mouth was still forming objections, or thanks, or questions. The interaction had consumed maybe 90 seconds of his life. He had forgotten about it by the time he started the van's engine, his mind already shifting to the day's route and the packages that needed delivering. But she had remembered. Now standing in his bathroom with water pooling around her bare feet and terror painting her features in shades of gray, her words tumbled out in a confession that explained nothing and everything simultaneously. "You gave me a sandwich 3 weeks ago. You told me things would get better." Ethan's memory lurched back to the convenience store, the woman with coins in her pocket, the teenager behind the counter. His eyes traced the face before him, now searching for familiarity beneath layers of exhaustion and fear. Recognition arrived slowly, like developing film in a darkroom, shadows resolving into shapes that matched his recollection. "I remember." The admission seemed to break something inside her. Her shoulders began to shake, tremors starting small, then building until her entire frame shuddered with suppressed sobs. She pressed one hand to her mouth, trying to contain sounds that leaked out anyway, raw and animal. Lily called again from the bedroom, her voice carrying notes of concern that a 6-year-old shouldn't have to feel. The woman's eyes went wide, panic replacing despair. She took a step backward, spine hitting the wall, hands rising in that same gesture of surrender. "Please, don't let her see me like this. I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't be here. I was so cold, the door wasn't locked. I only wanted to get warm for a few minutes." Each sentence fragmented under the weight of emotions too large for language to carry. Ethan found himself caught between competing instincts: protect Lily from whatever chaos this woman represented, or extend compassion to someone whose desperation had driven her to break into his home. His hands still gripped the door frame, keeping the distance between them measured in careful feet. "How did you get in the back door?" "The one by the dumpsters. It was stuck but not locked. I pushed and it opened. I only wanted to use the bathroom. To wash. To be somewhere warm. I wasn't going to steal anything. I swear." Her voice cracked on the last word, splitting into harmonics of shame and defiance. Ethan's eyes swept the small bathroom, searching for evidence that might contradict her claims. The medicine cabinet hung open, revealing the sparse collection of generic pain relievers and Lily's bubblegum-flavored toothpaste. Nothing appeared disturbed beyond the woman's presence itself. Lily's voice rose again, more insistent now. "Daddy, where are you? I need you." The woman's face crumpled. Tears spilled over lashes that looked too fragile to contain them, tracking through dirt or makeup or simply the accumulated grime of living rough. She slid down the wall until she sat on the closed toilet lid, her hands covering her face, shoulders heaving with silent sobs. Ethan felt his anger deflating like a punctured tire air or escaping in a long hiss that left only exhaustion in its wake. He looked at her, really looked, and saw someone who had reached the bottom of a fall so long and steep that gravity itself had lost meaning. Her clothes hung on a frame that suggested weeks without adequate food. Her skin bore that particular grayness that came from sleeping in places without heat. Her hair, still damp from whatever washing she had managed, showed patches where tangles had been cut out rather than combed through. "Wait here." He spoke quietly, more command than request, and pulled the door partially closed. His feet carried him to the bedroom where Lily sat cross-legged on her bed, her favorite stuffed bear clutched to her chest. Her expression mixed confusion with the beginnings of fear, eyes too wide for her small face. "Who's in the bathroom, Daddy?" His mind raced through possible explanations, discarding lies as quickly as they formed. Lily had inherited his inability to maintain deception, could sense dishonesty the way animals sense coming storms. He knelt beside her bed, hands gentle on her knees. "A woman who needs help, sweetheart. She's very scared and very sad. Daddy needs a few minutes to talk with her. Can you stay here and be patient? Is she a stranger?" "Yes." "Did she break in?" The bluntness of the question caught him off guard. Lily watched him with an intensity that reminded him she absorbed far more than he sometimes credited. He chose his words carefully, aware that whatever he said next would shape how she understood the situation. She came in through a door that wasn't locked properly. She didn't know anyone was home. She just needed somewhere warm. "Are you mad at her? I don't know yet. I'm trying to understand what happened." Lily processed this information with the seriousness of a judge reviewing evidence. Her grip on the bear tightened, small fingers disappearing into synthetic fur. Then she nodded, her blonde hair bouncing with the motion. "Okay, but Daddy, if she's sad and scared, maybe she needs a hug. Mrs. Chen says hugs make everything better." The simple wisdom of the statement hit him like a physical blow. He pulled Lily close, kissing the top of her head, breathing in the scent of the strawberry shampoo he bought 4 bottles at a time when the dollar store had them on sale. "You have the biggest heart, Lily Cole. Don't ever let anyone take that from you." She hugged him back, her arms barely reaching around his neck. Then she settled onto her bed, bare positioned beside her, prepared to wait as requested. Ethan stood his knees protesting and returned to the bathroom where the woman sat exactly as he had left, her collapsed into herself like a building mid-demolition. He closed the door behind him, creating a space separate from his daughter's awareness. The formula bottle still lay on the floor, its contents spreading in a pale puddle. He retrieved it, set it on the sink, then lowered himself to sit on the edge of the bathtub. The porcelain felt cold through his jeans. He waited, giving the woman time to compose herself or continue falling apart, whatever she needed to do. Eventually, her hands lowered from her face. She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much and expected nothing. His voice, when he finally spoke, carried no judgment, only exhaustion. "Start from the beginning." So she did. Her name was Claire Donovan, though she hadn't used it in weeks, had cycled through fake names and cash-only transactions, trying to stay invisible in a city full of cameras and digital fingerprints. She had been an executive assistant at Cascade Technologies, a mid-sized firm downtown that specialized in something involving cloud infrastructure and data management details. Ethan didn't fully comprehend, and Claire didn't bother explaining. The job had been good, stable, the kind of position that paid enough to rent a decent apartment and save a little each month. She had been competent, maybe more than competent. Her boss had trusted her with access to files most employees never saw: financial reports, contracts, internal communications between executives. The trust had been earned through 2 years of reliable performance, of arriving early and staying late, of anticipating needs before they became problems. She had believed in the company, in the work they were doing, in the narrative of innovation and progress and that management sold during all-hands meetings. Then she had started noticing inconsistencies. At first, small things. Invoices from vendors she couldn't find in any business or registry. payments flowing to shell companies registered in states that existed primarily as tax havens, contracts signed by executives whose names didn't appear on the company directory. She had assumed mistakes to confusion in the rapid growth that Cascade had been experiencing. But the inconsistencies had multiplied, forming patterns that her analytical mind couldn't ignore. She had started digging quietly during lunch breaks and evenings when the office emptied. She had cross-referenced payments with project milestones, traced money flowing through accounts that existed only on internal spreadsheets. The picture that emerged turned her stomach. Cascade's executives were siphoning money, millions of dollars, routing it through fake vendors and phantom contracts. The fraud had been running for at least 3 years, possibly longer. Investor money, client payments, all of it bleeding away to private accounts. Claire had convinced herself that bringing it to light was the moral thing to do. She had imagined herself a hero, someone who stood up for what was right even when it was difficult. She had printed documents, copied files to a USB drive she bought at an office supply store, compiled evidence that she believed would be irrefutable. Her mistake had been confronting her boss directly. She had scheduled a meeting, closed the door to his office, laid out what she had found. He had listened with an expression of mild interest, occasionally nodding, never interrupting. When she finished, he had leaned back in his leather chair, hands folded across his stomach, and smiled. Not warmly. The smile had contained no humor, only cold assessment. "You're a smart woman, Claire. Smart women know when to keep their mouths shut." The threat had been unsubtle. She had left his office shaking, clutching the printed documents, realizing too late that she had shown her hand to someone with far more power than she possessed. Within 24 hours, everything had fallen apart. Security had escorted her from the building, claiming she had been stealing company property. Her bank accounts had been frozen pending investigation of fraud allegations. Her apartment had been broken into, personal files scattered, her laptop stolen. She had gone to the police with the USB drive and her story. The officers had listened politely, taken notes, then explained that without evidence of physical harm or clear criminal action, there wasn't much they could do. Corporate fraud investigations required resources their department didn't have. Maybe she should contact a lawyer or the FBI. They had sent her away with a case number that felt like a participation trophy. The lawyer she found had wanted a retainer she couldn't pay. Her savings were locked in accounts she couldn't access. Credit cards had been canceled. Her phone service had been disconnected for non-payment. Within a week, she had become functionally invisible, erased from the systems that defined existence in modern society. The eviction had come next. Her landlord had claimed missed rent payments, though Claire insisted she had always paid on time. Didn't matter. The legal system moved faster when someone with money wanted you gone. Her belongings had appeared in the hallway. Locks changed her pleas for time, falling on ears that had heard too many sob stories to distinguish between legitimate and fabricated hardship. She had tried staying with friends, but friends had proven scarce when circumstances turned dire. College acquaintances made excuses. Co-workers didn't return calls. The few who did had listened to her story with increasing skepticism, as if paranoia were contagious, and they feared catching it through simple proximity. Eventually, she had stopped asking. Her car had been stolen or repossessed, she wasn't entirely sure which, from a parking lot where she had been sleeping. Everything of value had vanished with it: clothes, documents, the last $200 she had managed to withdraw before the accounts froze. She had been left with the coat she wore, a backpack containing the USB drive, and a few toiletries, in the growing certainty that she had miscalculated how quickly the powerful could destroy someone weak. The shelters had been full, waiting lists stretched weeks into the future. She had slept in bus stations, public libraries, fast food restaurants, where she could nurse a small coffee for hours. Security guards had routed her from most places, eventually their instructions polite but firm. "Can't loiter here, ma'am. Move along." She had started washing in public bathrooms, changing clothes when possible, trying to maintain some veneer of normalcy. But dirt accumulated faster than she could clean it away. Her appearance deteriorated, crossing thresholds that transformed her from temporarily displaced to permanently homeless in the eyes of those who bothered to look. The sandwich at the convenience store had been the first kindness anyone had shown her in weeks. She had carried the wrapper in her pocket afterward, a talisman proving that compassion still existed somewhere in the world. When temperatures had dropped below freezing the previous night, when her body had begun to shut down from exposure and exhaustion, she had found herself walking through Ethan's neighborhood, drawn by the memory of his face and the hope that Maybe somehow the man who had helped her once might help her again. She hadn't planned to break in, hadn't intended to involve him in the nightmare her life had become. But the back door had been stuck rather than locked, and desperation had supplied strength she hadn't known she still possessed. She had slipped inside, found the bathroom, begun washing weeks of accumulated grime from skin that felt like it belonged to someone else. The hot water had been a revelation, a luxury so profound it had broken something inside her. She had stood under the weak stream and cried, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of how far she had fallen. Then Ethan had opened the door, and the last fragment of her hope had shattered into the recognition that she had crossed a line from which there might be no return. Ethan listened to all of this in silence, his expressions cycling through disbelief, anger, sympathy, and exhaustion. When she finally stopped talking, her voice raw from confession, he sat without moving, processing information that rewrote his understanding of the situation. His initial assumption, junkie or mentally ill woman who had wandered into the wrong apartment, had been wrong. She wasn't dangerous in the way he had feared. She was simply someone whose bad luck had compounded exponentially, each setback making the next more inevitable. But she had also brought danger to his doorstep. Men who could freeze bank accounts and orchestrate evictions didn't stop pursuing someone who threatened them with evidence of crimes worth millions. If she was telling the truth, if the USB drive contained what she claimed, then her presence in his home had transformed it from sanctuary to target. Why here? Why my apartment? Claire's hands twisted together in her lap, fingers nodding and unnodding in rhythms of anxiety. I recognized your building from that day at the store. I remembered thinking you looked tired but kind. When I was walking last night freezing, I saw the building and thought maybe I could just warm up for a few minutes in the hallway. Then I found the back door. I didn't know which apartment was yours. I just came inside and found the bathroom. I wasn't thinking clearly. I'm sorry. The apology hung between them, inadequate but sincere. Ethan's mind chewed on implications, calculating risks he was unequipped to assess. He had Lily to protect. Every decision filtered through that single overriding priority. Helping this woman might be the right thing to do in some abstract moral sense, but rightness didn't shield 6-year-olds from consequences. You need to leave. The words emerged harder than he intended, sharpened by fear, masquerading as pragmatism. Claire's face collapsed, but she nodded, hands already pushing against the toilet lid to stand. Her legs shook with the effort, knees buckling before locking. I understand. I'm sorry. Thank you for listening. She moved toward the door, each step uncertain, her hand reaching for the knob. Ethan stayed seated on the bathtub's edge, telling himself he was making the sensible choice, the only choice a responsible father could make. She would leave, disappear back into whatever shadows had hidden her before, and his life would return to its previous configuration of poverty and struggle, but at least predictable safety. The bathroom door opened before Claire reached it. Lily stood in the hallway, her bear dangling from one hand, her expression solemn with the gravity only children can achieve when confronting adult problems. Her eyes found Claire, first taking in the wet hair and gaunt features and trembling hands. Then she looked at her father, and in that look he saw judgment delivered without words. The lady is leaving. Lily's voice carried no accusation, only curiosity, but Ethan felt the question like an indictment. He stood, his hand reflexively reaching for his daughter, but she had already stepped past him, moving toward Claire with the fearlessness of someone too young to understand danger. Are you okay? Claire stared down at the small face tilted up toward her own eyes, widening with something approaching wonder. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. She shook her head instead, a tiny motion that acknowledged more than words could carry. Lily turned to the towel rack, her small hands pulling down a bath towel that had been washed. So many times the fabric felt more like gauze than terry cloth. She held it out, arms extended, offering comfort in the only way she knew. You're shaking. You should get warm first. The gesture was so simple, so free of calculation or judgment, that Ethan felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. He watched Claire's hands reach out slowly, take the towel with the reverence usually reserved for sacred objects. She clutched it to her body, her face contorting with emotions that had no name, and fresh tears spilled down cheeks already raw from crying. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. Lily patted Claire's arm, the motion gentle, and looked back at her father with eyes that asked a question he suddenly couldn't ignore. His daughter, who owned almost nothing and understood poverty as simple reality rather than injustice, had just demonstrated more humanity than he was managing. The shame of that realization hit him like cold water, shocking him into awareness of how fear had been masquerading as practicality. He cleared his throat, the sound rough in the small space. "Claire, when's the last time you ate?" She looked at him, confusion replacing despair. Her mouth moved silently, trying to calculate time that had lost structure. "I don't remember. Days, maybe." Ethan exhaled through his nose, accepting what he was about to do, despite every instinct screaming that involvement meant danger. He took Lily's hand, his grip gentle but firm. "Then we'll start there. Come out when you're ready. I'll make breakfast." He guided Lily back to the bedroom, ignoring her barrage of questions about who the lady was and why she was so sad, and could they keep her. He distracted her with the task of choosing what to wear to school, then moved to the kitchenette and began pulling ingredients from the mini fridge. Eggs, half a loaf of bread margarine because butter cost too much. He set an extra plate on the folding table, acknowledging through action what his words hadn't quite committed to. The sound of running water from the bathroom continued for several minutes. When it finally stopped, silence stretched until Ethan wondered if Claire had somehow escaped through a window too small for any adult to fit through. Then the door opened, releasing steam into cooler air, and Claire emerged. She looked marginally more human, face clean and hair somewhat less chaotic. But she also looked more vulnerable, the grime having provided a kind of armor that its absence revealed. She stood in the doorway, uncertain hands still clutching the towel Lily had given her. "Sit, please." Ethan gestured to the chair he had set with the extra plate. Claire moved carefully, as if sudden movements might cause the floor to collapse, and lowered herself onto the seat. Lily emerged from the bedroom dressed in jeans and a purple sweater with a cartoon character whose name Ethan could never remember. She climbed onto her own chair, swinging her legs, studying their unexpected guest with open curiosity. "Are you homeless?" Lily's question cut through any pretense of polite conversation. Ethan froze in the motion of cracking eggs into the pan, his mind racing for a way to redirect without lying. Claire beat him to a response, her voice quiet but steady. "Yes, I am." "That's sad. Do you have a family?" "Not really, not anymore. We're Daddy's family. Just us two. But Mrs. Chen says family isn't just blood. It's people who care about you." Claire's eyes found Ethan's across the small kitchen. Something passed between them, an acknowledgement of the strange territory they had entered together, bound by a sandwich given 3 weeks ago, and a child's uncomplicated compassion. He returned his attention to the eggs, scrambling them with focus that allowed him to avoid examining too closely what he was feeling. Breakfast assembled itself through practiced efficiency. Toast browned eggs divided onto 3 plates, margarine spread thin because the container was nearly empty. Ethan brought everything to the table, setting Claire's portion before her with careful neutrality. She stared at the food like it might be an illusion, her hand rising toward the fork, then hesitating. "It's okay," Lily said, already shoveling eggs into her mouth with the enthusiasm unique to children and golden retrievers. "We have enough." Claire picked up the fork with trembling fingers and took a small bite. Her eyes closed, face transforming as flavor and warmth registered. She chewed slowly, making the food last, then took another bite and another, accelerating as hunger overrode whatever shame had been keeping her from eating quickly. Ethan watched peripherally while pretending focus on his own plate, noting how her ribs showed through the shirt, how her collarbones jutted like scaffolding. They ate in silence, punctuated only by Lily's chatter about school and friends, and a project involving cotton balls and construction paper that she was very excited about. Claire listened, nodding at appropriate moments, occasionally smiling at something Lily said. The normalcy of it felt surreal, as if they were actors performing a scene without quite understanding their roles. When plates were empty, Lily carried hers to the sink with the pride of someone executing an important task. She returned to stand beside Claire's chair, head tilted in examination. "Are you going to stay?" The question hung in air, thick with implications. Ethan opened his mouth to provide an answer that was his to give, but Claire spoke first. "I don't know. That's up to your daddy." All eyes turned to him. Ethan felt the weight of the moment, understanding that whatever he said next would set their trajectory. He could still send her away, could choose safety over compassion, could prioritize his daughter's protection above all else. That was what responsible fathers did. That was what survival in their circumstances demanded. But Lily was watching him with those enormous blue eyes, waiting to see what kind of man her father would choose to be. And Claire was waiting with the resignation of someone who had learned to expect rejection, who had already begun the psychological process of returning to cold streets and public bathrooms. Ethan thought about the sandwich he had bought without hesitation, the way he had handed it to a stranger and told her things would get better. He thought about Lily's towel offered with the same unthinking kindness. He thought about his own mother, dead 6 years now, who had always said that character was defined by how you treated people who could offer you nothing in return. You can stay for a little while, just until we figure out what to do. The words emerged quieter than he intended, but their impact was loud. Claire's hands flew to her face, covering a sob that escaped anyway. Lily clapped her enthusiasm, uncomplicated by the logistics that were already crowding Ethan's mind. He held up a hand, forestalling celebrations. But we need rules. I have to go to work. You'll stay here with the door locked. You don't answer if anyone knocks. You don't go near the windows. And tonight when I get back, you tell me everything. No more half-truths. Everything. Claire nodded, hands dropping to reveal a face transformed by something that might have been hope or gratitude or simply relief at having a few more hours of safety. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, voice thick when she spoke. Thank you, I promise I'll... He cut her off with a gesture. Thank me later, after we figure out if I just made a terrible mistake. The words were harsh, but Claire nodded understanding. She knew what he was risking, what he was offering, the knife-edge balance between kindness and foolishness. Ethan stood, began clearing plates, his mind already moving through the day's logistics. He would take Lily to school, complete his route return before dark. Simple plan. Nothing could go wrong except everything. Lily hugged Claire before they left, her small arms wrapping around a waist too thin for health. Claire hugged back, careful as if afraid her touch might break something fragile. Then Ethan and Lily were out the door, descending stairs, emerging into morning cold that bit through jackets and reminded them winter wasn't finished. The walk to school proceeded like always, Lily's hand in his, her voice rising in questions and observations. But Ethan's attention divided, part of him listening to his daughter, part scanning the street for signs of trouble he couldn't define. They reached Hawthorne Elementary without incident. He delivered his usual instructions: be kind, be brave, be yourself, and watched her disappear through yellow doors. The van started with its typical reluctance, coughing smoke before the engine caught. Ethan sat for a moment, hands on the wheel, staring at nothing. What had he done? What had he brought into their lives? The questions had no good answers. Only the echo of his mother's voice reminding him that doing nothing was still a choice and not always the right one. He drove his route on autopilot, hauling boxes upstairs, knocking on doors, accepting signatures from people who barely looked at him. His mind churned through scenarios, each one worse than the last. What if Claire's story was a lie? What if she was mentally ill? Dangerous, a threat he had invited across his threshold. What if men came looking for her? What if they hurt Lily, but what if her story was true? What if she was exactly what she appeared? Someone desperate who had tried to do the right thing and been crushed for it. What if turning her away meant condemning her to freeze on streets that didn't care whether she lived or died? The moral calculus refused to resolve into clear answers. Ethan delivered packages, collected signatures, drove through neighborhoods that blurred together into a single impression of concrete and struggling lives. Lunch never happened, the granola bar forgotten in his focus on completing the route quickly enough to get home before Lily finished school. 4 o'clock found him climbing stairs to the 4th floor, his heart rate elevated beyond what physical exertion explained. He unlocked the door, pushed it open, and saw Claire exactly where he had left her, sitting on the futon with the towel still wrapped around her shoulders. She had been crying, her eyes were red and swollen, but she stood when he entered, hands wringing together. Everything okay? She nodded quickly, too quickly, the motion of someone desperate to please. No one came. I stayed away from the windows like you said. I didn't touch anything except the bathroom. Ethan believed her. The apartment looked exactly as he had left it. Nothing disturbed, no sign of ransacking or theft. Relief flooded through him, followed immediately by the recognition that one day of nothing happening meant very little about tomorrow or the day after. I need to get Lily. Can you stay here? Yes, I will. He left again, descended stairs that felt steeper than usual, walked the 3 blocks to Mrs. Chen's apartment. Lily greeted him with her usual enthusiasm, backpack slung over one shoulder, already chattering about her day. Mrs. Chen smiled from her doorway, waved goodbye, and Ethan guided his daughter back through streets that seemed to have acquired shadows where none had existed that morning. Inside the apartment, Lily immediately gravitated toward Claire, who had moved to sit at the folding table. She showed Claire drawings from school explained in exhaustive detail, a game played at recess, asked if Claire liked macaroni and cheese, because that was what they were having for dinner. Claire listened with an attention that seemed to require her entire focus, nodding and smiling, and occasionally asking questions that made Lily light up with the joy of being heard. Ethan prepared dinner, his hands moving through familiar motions while his mind remained elsewhere. The domestic scene should have felt comforting. Instead, it felt like a setup, the calm before storms that arrived without warning. He kept glancing at the door, expecting knocks that never came. They ate together, three people around a table meant for two knees bumping elbows, crowding. Lily dominated conversation, her voice filling spaces that might otherwise have been occupied by tension. After dinner came homework, bath time pajamas, the bedtime story that tonight felt like a luxury they couldn't afford, but Ethan provided anyway because Lily's routine was sacred. When his daughter finally slept breath, evening into the rhythm of dreams, Ethan returned to the main room where Claire waited on the futon, hands folded in her lap, posture suggesting someone prepared for judgment. He sat in the chair across from her, the folding table between them like a negotiating surface. Now tell me everything, starting with exactly what's on that USB drive. Claire reached into her coat pocket, the one she hadn't taken off despite the apartment's warmth. Her hand emerged holding a small flash drive, black and unremarkable, the kind sold in packs of 10 at office supply stores. She set it on the table between them, and Ethan stared at it, this tiny object that supposedly contained evidence of crimes worth millions. She talked for over an hour, her voice low enough not to wake Lily, explaining in detail what she had found at Cascade Technologies. She described shell companies registered to addresses that were actually UPS stores. She outlined payment flows that started with legitimate invoices but terminated in offshore accounts. She named executives Marcus Webb, the CFO, Jennifer Santos, VP of Operations, her own boss, David Klein, Senior Director of Finance, and detailed their roles in the fraud. The scheme had been elegant in its simplicity. Cascade Technologies had been growing rapidly, attracting investor money and client contracts. The executives had created fake vendors companies that existed only on paper and authorized payments for services never rendered. The amounts had been carefully calibrated to stay beneath thresholds that triggered automatic audits. A few thousand here, 10,000 there, dispersed across dozens of fake companies and hundreds of transactions. Over 3 years, they had siphoned nearly $8 million. Claire had documented everything, emails discussing the scheme in language barely coded, financial spreadsheets showing discrepancies between reported and actual expenses, contracts signed with digital signatures that forensic analysis would prove were forged. She had also recorded meetings using her phone positioned in her purse, capturing conversations where executives discussed how to launder money through cryptocurrency exchanges and real estate purchases. The evidence was comprehensive, damning, exactly the kind that could dismantle an entire organization and send multiple people to prison for years. Why didn't you just mail it anonymously to the SEC or FBI? Ethan's question was reasonable. Claire's answer revealed the complexity beneath surface logic. I tried. I sent an anonymous email to the FBI's tips line. Never heard back. I think they get thousands of tips and most are garbage. Without someone willing to testify, without a person they can question and verify it as just another digital file that might be fake or altered. So you need to be the whistleblower in person. Yes, but I can't walk into an FBI office now. My name is on police reports as a fraud suspect. If I show up claiming my former employer framed me, they'll think I'm making excuses. I need someone they'll take seriously, someone with credibility. I don't know who that is. The hopelessness in her voice was total, the sound of someone who had exhausted every option and found them all locked. Ethan picked up the USB drive, turning it over in his fingers, feeling its weight negligible in physical terms on crushing an implication. I know someone. Maybe. Claire's head snapped up, eyes widening. The words had emerged before Ethan fully processed the decision to speak them. But now committed, he continued. Guy I used to work with at the plant. Rick something. He left to become a cop. Portland PD. We weren't close, but we were friendly. If I called him, explain the situation, maybe he could help, or at least point us to someone who could. The risk inherent in that statement was obvious. Calling Rick meant involving another person, expanding the circle of those who knew about Claire and the evidence she carried. It meant trusting someone Ethan hadn't spoken to in 2 years. It meant taking action that couldn't be undone. But what was the alternative? Let Claire remain hidden in his apartment indefinitely while men who had already demonstrated ruthlessness searched for her hope. The problem solved itself through some mechanism he couldn't imagine. Claire was staring at him with an expression that mixed hope and terror, the combination producing something almost painful to witness. You would do that? Contact your friend. I don't know if he's still my friend. But yeah, I would. Why? The question was simple. The answer was not. Ethan thought about the sandwich, again, about Lily's towel, about his mother's voice in his head talking about character. He thought about who he wanted to be versus who circumstances were making him become. He thought about the gap between those two versions of himself and whether closing it was even possible. Because someone should. And right now, I'm someone. The statement was barely an explanation, more a placeholder for thoughts too complex to articulate. But Claire nodded as if he had spoken volumes, her eyes filling with tears that didn't fall, her hands clutching the towel Lily had given her hours ago. They sat in silence after that, the apartment settling around them with the creaks and mice of old buildings full of old problems. Somewhere above, footsteps tracked across ceiling. Somewhere below, a television murmured through floorboards. Outside, the city continued its indifferent rotation, caring nothing for the small drama unfolding in 320 square feet of rented space. Ethan eventually stood, exhaustion pulling at bones that felt older than his 34 years. He gestured toward Lily's bed. You can sleep there tonight. I'll take the futon. Tomorrow we figure out next steps. I can't take her bed. You can and you will. Lily will sleep with me for one night. She'll think it's an adventure. Claire looked like she wanted to argue but lacked the energy. She moved toward the bed, each step heavy with the accumulated weariness of weeks without rest. She sat on the edge, then lay down fully clothed, her body curling into a position that suggested someone who had forgotten how to feel safe. Within minutes, her breathing evened into sleep. Ethan watched her for a moment, this stranger who had become his responsibility, through a chain of decisions that seemed inevitable in retrospect. Then he unfolded the futon, collected Lily from her bed, with movements careful enough not to wake her, and settled them both onto the makeshift surface. His daughter mumbled something unintelligible, then pressed against his side, seeking warmth and sleep. He stared at the ceiling, tracking cracks that mapped the building's slow decay, and wondered if he had just saved someone or doomed them all. Morning arrived with the alarm's electronic scream. Ethan silenced it before it could wake Lily, extracted himself from her sleeping form, and began the day's routine with adjustments. Claire still slept in Lily's bed, her face smoothed by unconsciousness into something younger than her 31 years. He let her rest, prepared. Breakfast quietly woke his daughter with whispers. Can the lady stay in my bed again tonight? Lily's question came while he was brushing her hair, his fingers working through tangles with practiced gentleness. He met her eyes in the bathroom mirror, seeing his own uncertainty reflected back as simple trust. Maybe, sweetheart. We'll see. I like her. She's nice. And she needs us. The observation was delivered with the certainty of someone who saw the world in clear terms. People either needed help or didn't, and helping was obviously the correct response. Ethan wished he could maintain that clarity, that uncomplicated moral vision. But adulthood had taught him that help could be dangerous, that kindness could be exploited, that sometimes the people who needed you most were the ones who destroyed you in the process. Be kind, be brave, be yourself, he told Lily at the school gate, repeating the morning mantra. She hugged him, then ran toward the yellow doors and the day that waited beyond them. Ethan watched until she disappeared, then returned to the apartment where Claire was awake, sitting at the table, her hands wrapped around a mug of water, heated in the microwave, because they didn't have tea or coffee to offer her. I'll call my friend, Rick. Tonight after I get Lily from school. For now, you do what you did yesterday. Stay inside. Stay away from windows. Stay quiet. Claire nodded, her gratitude visible in the set of her shoulders, the way her fingers tightened on the mug. Ethan left for work, descended stairs, climbed into the van, and began the route that would consume his day. The hours passed in their usual blur. Packages delivered, signatures collected, miles accumulated on a vehicle that protested with sounds that suggested imminent mechanical failure. Ethan's mind remained divided, part focused on work, part running through conversations with Rick that hadn't happened yet, imagining responses, preparing arguments, trying to construct a narrative that wouldn't sound insane. Around noon, while stopped at a red light, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. He checked it during a break, sitting in the van outside a warehouse, and felt his stomach drop. Saw someone asking questions about a woman in your building. Be careful. The message was unsigned. The area code was local. Ethan stared at the screen, reading the words multiple times, trying to extract more information than they contained. Someone asking questions about a woman in his building. His hands were shaking when he forwarded the text to his own email, then deleted it from his phone, as if that would somehow make the information less real. Someone was looking. Someone new. The sanctuary of his apartment had already been breached in ways beyond Claire's entry through an unlocked door. He considered calling the police, dismissed the idea immediately. What would he say? A stranger sent an anonymous text suggesting vague threats. They would do nothing, or worse, they would investigate and discover Claire, and then the situation would spiral beyond any hope of control. Instead, he called Mrs. Chen. If anyone comes asking about me or Lily, you don't know anything. Can you do that? The old woman's silence stretched long enough that Ethan thought the connection had failed. Then her voice came through, careful and weighted with concern. What kind of trouble, Ethan? Not mine, someone else's. But I need to keep Lily safe. Always, Mrs. Chen said. Always safe. He thanked her, hung up, and sat in the van while his heart rate slowly returned to something approaching normal. Someone was looking. The clock was running faster than he had anticipated. Whatever he was going to do, it needed to happen soon. The rest of his route blurred together, marked only by increasing anxiety that made his hands clumsy and his thoughts scattered. He missed a delivery, had to double back, wasted 30 minutes that felt like theft, from time he couldn't afford to lose. When 4 o'clock finally arrived, he abandoned the van outside his building and took stairs 2 at a time, his lungs burning. Claire was exactly where he had left her, but her face told him she knew something had changed. He showed her the text, watched her skin go gray as she read. Her hand rose to her mouth, trembling. They found me. Not yet. But they're looking. We need to move faster. He collected Lily from Mrs. Chen, the old woman's eyes, asking questions her mouth didn't, and returned to the apartment where tension had become a physical presence thick enough to choke. Dinner was silent except for Lily's chatter, which even she seemed to sense was filling space usually occupied by adult concerns. After she went to bed, Ethan pulled out his phone and scrolled through contacts until he found Rick's number, saved from 2 years ago when they had worked together. His thumb hovered over the call button. Once he pressed it, there would be no taking back the decision. He would have committed himself, committed Lily to whatever came next. He looked at Claire, who watched him with eyes that had learned to expect nothing but still held fragments of hope. He pressed call. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered, slightly deeper than memory suggested, but still recognizably Rick. Ethan Cole. Wow, long time, man. What's going on? Taking a breath that felt like the last one before diving into water of unknown depth, Ethan began to explain. He talked for 15 minutes, laying out Claire's story, the evidence on the USB drive, the danger that had arrived at his doorstep. Rick listened without interrupting, occasionally making sounds that suggested he was taking notes. When Ethan finished, silence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. Then Rick's voice returned, careful and measured. This is heavy, Ethan. Corporate fraud, frozen accounts, people chasing her. This isn't something I can just handle. I'm patrol, not white-collar crime. But I know someone. FBI agent specializes in financial crimes. I could reach out, see if she's interested. The word FBI sent electricity through Ethan's nervous system. Federal involvement meant escalation, meant resources beyond local police capabilities. But it also meant exposure, official records, the kind of attention that could go wrong in ways he couldn't predict. How long would that take, Rick? Exhaled static crackling through the speaker. I'll make calls tonight. Tomorrow morning at the latest. Can you sit tight until then? Not much choice, Ethan. Listen, if what she's saying is true, these people won't stop. You need to be smart. Keep her out of sight. Don't tell anyone else. And if you see anything suspicious, call 911 immediately. Don't try to be a hero. The advice was sensible. Ethan wondered if he had already violated the hero clause by letting Claire into his home in the first place. They exchanged a few more words, establishing a plan for Rick to call back after contacting the FBI agent, then hung up. Claire had been listening, her face cycling through emotions as the conversation progressed. When Ethan set the phone down, she looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite name. "Thank you for believing me, for helping me." He didn't respond immediately, his eyes drifting toward the bedroom where Lily slept, trusting him to keep her safe, believing that her father made good decisions. The weight of that trust felt crushing. He hoped he deserved it. He feared he didn't. "Just so we're clear, if anything happens to my daughter because of this, I will never forgive myself, or you." The words were harsh, deliberately so establishing boundaries that needed to exist. Claire nodded, accepting the condition without protest. She understood what he was risking, what he stood to lose. Her presence in his home was a debt she could never fully repay, no matter how the situation resolved. They sat together in the dimness of the apartment, two people who had been strangers days ago, now bound by circumstances neither had chosen. Outside, Portland's night sounds filtered through walls too thin to provide real privacy. Somewhere nearby, a siren wailed. Somewhere farther, music played too loud. The city continued its indifferent rotation, and Ethan wondered if the morning would bring solutions or catastrophes. He thought about calling Rick back, insisting on faster action. He thought about driving Claire to a police station himself, demanding protection. He thought about packing bags and running, taking Lily somewhere far away, where corporate fraud and dangerous men couldn't reach them. But he did none of those things. He simply sat in his apartment with a woman he barely knew, waiting for a phone call that might change everything, hoping he had made the right choice, knowing he wouldn't know until it was too late to change his mind. Above them, footsteps crossed a ceiling. Below them, a television murmured. And in the bedroom, Lily slept, dreaming, whatever six-year-olds dream, her stuffed bear tucked against her chest, her faith in her father absolute and unexamined. That faith, Ethan thought, might be the most terrifying thing of all. Morning came without answers. Rick didn't call. Ethan sent Lily to school, went to work, delivered packages through a haze of anxiety that made every face potentially threatening. He returned that afternoon to find Claire pacing the small apartment like a caged animal, her hands twisting together, her eyes red from crying, or exhaustion, or both. Still nothing. Her voice cracked on the words. Ethan shook his head, pulling out his phone to check for messages he knew weren't there. The silence felt like verdict, though, of what he couldn't say. Then Lily's voice cut through the tension from the bedroom. "Daddy, there's a man outside, in a black car. He's just sitting there, looking at our building." The words transformed everything. Ethan moved to the window, keeping to the side, peering out from an angle. 4 stories down, a black sedan sat at the curb, engine running, exhaust visible in the afternoon cold. A figure occupied the driver's seat, indistinct, but clearly watching the building's entrance. Claire had gone pale, her hand pressed to her chest like she was physically holding her heart inside her body. Her voice emerged as a whisper. "They found me." "We don't know," that Ethan said, but the protest sounded hollow even to himself. What were the odds of a random black car parking outside his building within 24 hours of an anonymous warning text? He was still formulating a plan. Call Rick, call 911, grab Lily and run, when the car door opened and a man emerged. Tall, expensive suit, dark sunglasses despite the cloud cover. He stood beside the vehicle, pulled out a phone and made a call. His eyes never left the building. Ethan's phone buzzed. Rick's name appeared on screen. He answered while still watching the man below. "The FBI agent is interested. She wants to meet tomorrow morning. 10 a.m. There's a diner on the east side, neutral territory. Can you bring Claire and the evidence?" Ethan's attention remained split between Rick's words and the scene unfolding outside. The man in the suit had ended his call, was now walking toward the building's entrance. "Rick, there's someone here. Black car, man in a suit, looks like he's about to enter the building." Rick's voice sharpened. "Can you get out another way?" "There's a back door. The one Claire came through. Take it, now, don't wait. Get somewhere public and stay there. I'll meet you. Where the library, main branch downtown, 30 minutes. I'll have people watching. Just get there." Ethan hung up, his mind suddenly clear with the adrenaline of crisis. He grabbed Lily from the bedroom, her eyes wide with questions he had no time to answer. He told Claire to get her coat, the one with the USB drive hidden in its lining. They moved as a unit toward the apartment door, but before Ethan could open it, footsteps echoed in the hallway, ascending from the floor below. Someone was coming up the stairs. He reversed direction, pulling Lily and Claire toward the back of the apartment, the narrow hallway that led to the door Claire had entered through days ago. His hands fumbled with the lock, time stretching into nightmare dimensions where simple mechanical actions took forever. The lock finally turned. The door opened onto a stairwell that smelled of garbage and stale cigarettes. Behind them, knocking started at the apartment door. Firm, persistent, the sound of someone who expected to be answered. "Portland PD, open up!" The voice carried authority, but Ethan didn't believe it. Real cops didn't arrive in expensive suits, driving cars that cost more than he made in a year. He pulled Lily and Claire into the stairwell, eased the door closed, and began descending. The stairs seemed endless. Each landing opened onto hallways identical to his own doors, concealing lives he would never know. They reached ground level and emerged into an alley behind the building, trash dumpsters, creating shadows that offered minimal concealment. Ethan paused, checking both directions, seeing no one. Which way? Claire's question demanded an answer he didn't have. Left led toward a street with more traffic. Right led deeper into the alley system that connected buildings. Both options felt equally dangerous. He chose left toward people and witnesses and the theory that violence happened more easily in isolation. They walked fast without running, three people trying to look like they belonged, despite everything suggesting otherwise. Lily's hand gripped his with strength that made his fingers ache. She hadn't said a word since they left the apartment, her face set in an expression of fear, carefully controlled. They emerged from the alley onto Southeast Morrison, turned right toward downtown, and began walking. Behind them, Ethan heard a car engine, but when he glanced back, he saw only normal traffic. Nothing that looked immediately threatening. They walked 4 blocks, then ducked into a convenience store where fluorescent lighting and security cameras offered minimal protection. Ethan called Rick while pretending to shop, phone pressed to his ear, his other hand maintaining contact with Lily. The old cop answered immediately. "Where are you, Morrison and 24th? Inside a store. Stay there. I'm sending a patrol unit. 5 minutes. Claire stood near the door, watching the street through glass marked with advertisements for lottery tickets and cigarettes. Her posture radiated tension, every muscle coiled for flight. Lily had found her way to the candy aisle, her eyes scanning colorful packages, seeking comfort in familiar rhythms. The minutes stretched. Ethan counted seconds, converted them to distance, imagined pursuit closing from multiple directions. When the patrol car finally pulled up outside, lights flashing without sirens, relief flooded through him so intensely it weakened his knees. 2 uniformed officers entered, both young, both carrying themselves with the careful awareness of people trained to assess threats. The taller one approached Ethan. "You, Cole? Yes. Come with us." They escorted all 3 to the patrol car, Ethan and Lily in back, Claire in front. The cage separating front and rear seats transformed the vehicle into a mobile prison, but Ethan felt safer than he had in days. The car pulled away from the curb, lights still flashing, and began navigating toward downtown. Lily finally spoke, her voice small and tight. "Are we in trouble, Daddy?" "No, sweetheart. These are the good guys. They're helping us." He hoped that was true. He hoped Rick was the friend he remembered rather than someone who had changed in ways that mattered. He hoped the FBI agent would be competent and interested and willing to act on evidence provided by a homeless woman and a delivery driver. He hoped a lot of things, knowing hope was insufficient, but having nothing else to offer. The library appeared ahead, a modern building of glass and steel that proclaimed civic investment in literacy and knowledge. The patrol car pulled into a loading zone, and the officers escorted them inside, past security checkpoints, into a reading room where Rick waited beside a woman in her 40s wearing a dark pantsuit and an expression of professional skepticism. Rick looked older than Ethan remembered, more weight around the middle, less hair on top, but his eyes were the same, sharp and assessing, missing nothing. He nodded, greeting, then gestured toward the woman. "This is Special Agent Maria Torres, FBI. She investigates financial crimes. I told her your situation. She wants to hear it directly." Agent Torres studied them with the attention of someone trained to detect deception. Her gaze lingered on Claire, taking in the worn coat and hollow cheeks, then shifted to Ethan and Lily. When she spoke, her voice carried no emotion, only professional distance. "Tell me everything, from the beginning, and show me what you have." So Claire told her story again, the words by now rehearsed through repetition, but no less true. She described Cascade Technologies, the fraud she had discovered, the confrontation with her boss, the systematic destruction of her life. She pulled the USB drive from her coat lining and set it on the table between them, This small object that supposedly justified everything that had happened. Agent Torres picked up the drive, turned it over in her fingers, then pulled a laptop from her bag and plugged it in. She opened files, her eyes scanning contents too quickly for Ethan to follow. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the library's ambient sounds, whispered conversations turning pages, the hum of ventilation systems. Finally, Agent Torres sat back, her expression shifting from skepticism to something approaching interest. This is substantial. If it's genuine, we're looking at multiple federal charges, wire fraud, money laundering, possibly RICO violations. But I'll need to verify authenticity. That takes time. How much time? Agent Torres looked at Ethan, perhaps hearing the desperation in his voice. Days, maybe a week. These files need analysis. We'll have to confirm they weren't altered or fabricated. We'll need to establish what the chain of custody. We'll need to corroborate with other evidence. We don't have a week. Those people found our apartment today. They'll keep looking. The agent's expression remained neutral, but something in her eyes suggested understanding. I can arrange protective custody. Get you somewhere safe while we work. All of us, Agent Torres glanced at Lily, who sat beside Ethan. Her bear clutched to her chest, listening to everything despite her age, suggesting she shouldn't understand. The agent's face softened fractionally. Yes, all of you. There's a safe house on the east side. It's not luxurious, but it's secure. You'll stay there until we can make arrests or determine the threat has passed. Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to insist they could return to normal life, wanted to pretend the past days had been an aberration rather than a fundamental shift in their circumstances. But Lily's hand in his small and trusting reminded him that his preferences mattered less than her safety. Okay, when tonight. Pack what you need. Light, 1 bag each. I'll have agents pick you up at the library in 2 hours. In the meantime, stay here. Don't use your phones. Don't contact anyone. Understood, they nodded, accepting instructions because alternative options had evaporated. Agent Torres collected her laptop, the USB drive carefully secured in an evidence bag, and stood. She looked at Claire with an expression that might have been respect. What you did took courage. Not many people would risk everything to expose fraud. I'll do my best to make sure that courage wasn't wasted. Then she left Rick, following after a quick farewell that felt inadequate to the history they shared. Ethan, Claire, and Lily remained in the reading room, 3 people who had been strangers less than a week ago, now bound together by choices that had felt inevitable, but whose consequences remained uncertain. Lily leaned against her father, her weight familiar and precious. She looked up at him with those enormous eyes. Is this an adventure, Daddy? The question broke something inside him. He pulled her close, kissing the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair that carried hints of Mrs. Chen's cookies and school hand soap. Yes, sweetheart, the biggest adventure we've ever had. Will it have a happy ending? The best adventures do. He hoped that wasn't a lie. He hoped Agent Torres would find evidence she needed, would move quickly enough to outpace the people hunting Claire. He hoped the safe house would be safe. He hoped returning to their apartment afterward would be possible, though increasingly that seemed unlikely. But mostly he hoped his daughter would forgive him someday for the choices he had made, for the danger he had accepted into their lives, for prioritizing compassion over caution. He hoped she would understand that sometimes doing the right thing looked exactly like doing the wrong thing, and that distinguishing between them required faith in outcomes that remained perpetually uncertain. They sat together in the library while time passed and other people browsed books and the city continued its indifferent rotation. When 2 hours had elapsed, federal agents arrived in an unmarked vehicle, and Ethan Cole loaded his daughter and their unexpected guest into back seats that smelled of coffee and bureaucracy. The van drove east, leaving behind the apartment that had been home to school where Lily learned the streets Ethan knew by heart. He watched through the window as familiar landmarks disappeared, replaced by neighborhoods he had only driven through while delivering packages. Lily slept against his shoulder, exhausted by stress her age shouldn't have to manage. Claire stared straight ahead, face-pale hands gripping the seat like she might fall without something solid to hold. And Ethan, caught between them, wondered if the moment everything changed had been when he opened that bathroom door, or if the change had begun earlier with a sandwich given to a stranger, because compassion demanded no better reason. The safe house revealed itself as a modest rambler in a subdivision where houses looked identical except for variations in lawn maintenance. The agents escorted them inside, showed them bedrooms with clean sheets and furniture, that suggested government procurement contracts, explained rules about staying away from windows, and not answering doors. Then they left, and Ethan, Claire, and Lily stood in the living room of a stranger's house. Their bags unpacked, their future, uncertain, their connection forged by crisis, and sustained by nothing more substantial than hope that doing right might somehow lead to being safe. Lily found the television remote and settled on the couch, cartoons providing temporary escape. Claire excused herself to the bathroom, her face suggesting she might be sick or crying or both. Ethan stood at the window looking out at a street where black cars might or might not be watching, where threats existed in potentials rather than certainties, where the only thing he knew for sure was that his life had become unrecognizable. His phone, which he had been told not to use, sat heavy in his pocket. He pulled it out anyway, found Mrs. Chen's number, and typed a quick text. "We're okay. Please don't worry. We'll explain when we can. Thank you for everything." He sent it before he could reconsider, then turned the phone off completely, following instructions that made sense, even if obedience felt like surrender. In the morning, they would begin waiting for Agent Torres to call with updates. They would exist in a house that wasn't theirs, eating food they didn't choose, living hours that felt stolen from the life they were supposed to be building. They would be safe, or as safe as temporary measures could guarantee, which was probably sufficient, but felt inadequate when measured against everything they had lost. But tonight, they were simply three people who had survived another day. That would have to be enough. The safe house settled into routine within 48 hours, though routine felt like the wrong word for existence, suspended between past and future with no clear path connecting them. Ethan woke the first morning on a mattress too soft for his back, in a room painted beige by someone who believed neutrality equaled comfort. Lily slept beside him, her breathing unchanged from their apartment, proof that children adapted to circumstances adults found disorienting. Claire occupied the second bedroom, door closed, and when Ethan passed it on the way to make breakfast, he heard sounds suggesting she hadn't slept at all. The kitchen yielded generic cereal, white bread, peanut butter food selected by people who understood nutrition, but not pleasure. He prepared breakfast while watching the street through curtains that remained drawn per instructions. Nothing moved except a neighbor retrieving a newspaper, an act so ordinary it felt like performance art. Ethan wondered if normal life had always looked this staged, or if crisis had rewired his perception to see threat in every gesture. Lily emerged, rubbing her eyes, dragging her stuffed bear by one arm. She climbed onto a chair at the unfamiliar table and studied the cereal box with the seriousness of someone decoding ancient texts. "Is this our house now?" The question carried no judgment, only curiosity about facts that shaped her world. Ethan poured milk over her cereal, measuring his response. "Just for a little while, until it's safe to go home." "When will that be?" Soon he lied, because sometimes lies were kinder than uncertainty. Claire appeared in the doorway, wearing the same clothes from yesterday because her possessions fit in a grocery bag. Her hair needed washing, face needed rest, body needed more than this temporary shelter could provide. She attempted a smile that collapsed halfway through. "Morning," Ethan gestured toward the food, and she sat accepting cereal like it was communion. They ate without speaking, three people who had become accidental family, bound by circumstances that refused resolution. The FBI had provided a contact number with instructions to call only in emergencies. Otherwise, they were to wait for Agent Torres to reach out with updates. Waiting, Ethan discovered, was its own form of torture. His delivery route continued without him, calls from his supervisor accumulating on voicemail until the phone's memory filled. He had texted a vague excuse about family emergency, knowing his job was likely already gone. Delivery drivers were replaceable. The company would have hired someone new before lunch. Money became immediate concern. The safe house provided shelter and basic food, but his next paycheck wouldn't arrive because he wasn't working to earn it. Rent on the apartment would come due in 2 weeks. Without income, eviction would follow, assuming the apartment still existed to evict them from. His landlord was not known for patience with tenants whose troubles attracted men in expensive suits. Lily finished breakfast and asked if she could watch cartoons. Ethan nodded, grateful for any distraction that occupied her attention away from adult anxieties bleeding through careful facades. She settled on the couch, remote in hand, and within seconds her face relaxed into the particular absorption only children achieved, completely present in fictional worlds. Claire cleared plates, hands moving with precision that suggested muscle memory from better times. She washed dishes by hand, though a dishwasher sat unused, the act itself providing structure. Ethan joined her drying what she cleaned, and they worked in silence that felt less comfortable than exhausted. How long did Agent Torres say the analysis would take? Claire's question emerged quiet enough not to carry beyond the kitchen. Ethan stacked a plate in the cabinet, buying seconds to remember exact words. Days, maybe a week. She needs to verify the files weren't altered, establish chain of custody, corroborate with other evidence. And if she finds something wrong with the files, the question hung between them, heavy with implications of neither wanted to examine. If the files proved inadmissible or insufficient, if technical analysis revealed problems that undermined their credibility, then Claire's testimony alone would be worthless. Her word against wealthy executives, a homeless woman, versus people with lawyers and connections and resources to bury opposition. Then we figure out next steps. The platitudes satisfied neither of them, but alternatives required energy they didn't possess. They finished dishes and Claire retreated to her room door, closing with a soft click that somehow sounded final. Ethan stood in the kitchen surrounded by government-issued appliances and generic furniture and wondered how his life had traveled from predictable poverty to this strange limbo in less than a week. His phone, powered off per instructions, felt like severed limb. The inability to check messages, respond to texts, verify that Mrs. Chen and others from his previous life still existed created anxiety that gnawed at concentration. But rules existed for reasons even when those reasons felt abstract compared to immediate discomfort. He joined Lily on the couch, her small body automatically pressing against his side. Cartoons played bright colors and simple conflicts resolved in 22 minutes minus commercials. She laughed at jokes he didn't understand, completely immersed, and he envied her ability to exist in the present without drowning in possible futures. The morning dissolved into afternoon without clear demarcation. Lunch materialized from refrigerator contents, sandwiches assembled with methodical care, apple slices arranged on plates, water in glasses because the safe house didn't stock juice. Claire emerged to eat, then disappeared again. Her presence in the house felt more through absence than participation. Around 3, while Ethan was attempting to teach Lily basic math using pennies he found in his pocket, knocking erupted at the front door. 3 sharp raps, authoritative, the sound of someone expecting admission. Everyone froze. Lily's eyes went wide, her hand clutching pennies tight enough to leave marks. Ethan's heart rate spiked, adrenaline flooding his system with memories of men in suits and black cars. More knocking, more insistent. Federal agents. "We need to speak with Claire Donovan." The voice carried credentials, but so had the voice at their apartment. Ethan moved to the window, peered through a gap in curtains, saw 2 people in FBI windbreakers standing on the porch. One matched Agent Torres's description. The other was male, older, carrying himself with the wariness of someone who had worked too many cases. He opened the door partially, keeping his body in the gap, ready to slam it if necessary. Agent Torres offered a tight smile. "May we come in?" Ethan stepped aside and they entered, bringing with them the smell of coffee and the weight of information they carried. Claire emerged from her bedroom, face-pale hands knotted together. Torres gestured toward the living room and they all sat, Ethan keeping Lily close. "We've completed preliminary analysis of the files. The evidence is solid. Emails authenticate against server logs, financial records match transaction histories. The audio recordings show no signs of manipulation. You documented $8 million in fraud over 3 years, possibly more, if we dig deeper." Claire's breath released in a sob. She tried to contain relief and vindication, mixing into something that looked like collapse. Torres continued, her voice maintaining professional distance. "But there's a complication. David Klein, your former boss, was found dead this morning in his home. Apparent suicide. Single gunshot wound note left behind, claiming responsibility for the fraud, saying he acted alone." The words detonated in the small room, their implications spreading in waves that hit everyone differently. Claire's face went from relief to horror, her hand rising to cover her mouth. Ethan felt his stomach drop, understanding that suicide, if it was suicide, complicated everything. "You don't believe it was suicide?" Torres met his eyes, and in them he saw confirmation before she spoke. The scene was staged well enough to pass initial inspection. But there are inconsistencies. The note was typed, not handwritten. Klein was right-handed, but the gun was in his left hand. There were no defensive wounds, but also no evidence he'd been drinking or taking medications that might explain impaired decision-making. We're treating it as suspicious pending full autopsy. What does that mean for Claire? For us, it means the investigation expands. If Klein was murdered, then others involved in the fraud are eliminating loose ends. It means you're all at increased risk until we make arrests. It also means we need Claire's testimony more than ever because our star witness just became a corpse with a convenient confession. Claire's voice emerged barely audible, threaded with guilt and fear. Did I get him killed by exposing this, did I? You didn't pull any trigger, Torres interrupted. You exposed criminals. What they do in response is on them, not you. But we need to move faster now. I'm recommending protective custody be extended indefinitely, and I'm accelerating the arrest timeline. We'll move on the other executives within 48 hours. The male agent who had remained silent finally spoke, his voice gravelly, from years of cigarettes or shouting or both. In the meantime, you stay here. No contact with anyone outside this house. No phone calls, no emails, no social media. Assume everyone is compromised until we say otherwise. We'll have agents watching the house 24/7. You see anything suspicious, you call the emergency number immediately. Understood. They nodded, accepting rules that transformed the safe house into prison. Torres stood, her partner following. She paused at the door, looking back at Claire. We'll get them. What you did matters. Don't let fear convince you otherwise. Then they left, and the house felt smaller than before, walls pressing closer. Air thicker. Lily had gone quiet during the conversation, her face serious in the way children became when adult problems intruded on protected childhood. She looked at Ethan with eyes too old for 6 years. Did someone die? The directness of the question left no room for evasion. Ethan pulled her onto his lap, held her close, and chose truth over comfort. Yes, sweetheart, a man died. The police are trying to figure out what happened. Was he a bad man? The question's complexity exceeded simple answers. Klein had committed fraud, had destroyed Claire's life, had threatened others who discovered his crimes. But he had also been someone's son, maybe someone's father, a human being whose death diminished the world regardless of his actions. He made bad choices, but that doesn't mean he deserved to die. Lily processed this, her small face scrunched in concentration. Then she asked the question Ethan had been avoiding. Are we safe here? He wanted to promise safety, to guarantee that nothing bad would reach them in this anonymous house with its drawn curtains and federal protection. But lies, even comforting ones, felt wrong when everything else had become uncertain. We're as safe as we can be. The police are protecting us. We just need to be patient a little longer. She accepted this with a nod, then slid off his lap and returned to her cartoons, seeking escape in fiction. Ethan envied that ability, the child's gift for compartmentalizing trauma into manageable pieces. Claire hadn't moved from where she sat, her body rigid with shock. When she finally spoke, her voice carried layers of emotion too tangled to separate. This is my fault. If I hadn't documented everything, if I'd just ignored what I saw, if I'd kept my head down, Ethan cut her off more sharply than intended. Stop, you did the right thing. What happened to Klein is on whoever killed him, not you. Don't let them make you regret having principles. But his principles got him killed, and mine might get you killed. Or Lily. How is that right? The question had no good answer. Only the unsatisfying truth that morality and consequences often diverged. Ethan moved to sit beside her, close enough to offer presence without crowding. When I gave you that sandwich at the convenience store, I didn't think about whether it was right or smart or safe. I just saw someone who needed help. You did the same thing when you documented that fraud. You saw something wrong and decided to do something about it. Maybe that makes us both idiots, but at least we're idiots who can sleep at night. Claire laughed, the sound bitter but genuine. I haven't slept in weeks. Fair point. They sat together in silence, broken only by cartoon sound effects. Two people who had made choices that seemed simple at the time but cascaded into complexity neither had anticipated. Evening approached, light through curtained windows, shifting from gray to darker gray, and Ethan realized he needed to prepare dinner from ingredients he hadn't chosen. The safe house kitchen yielded pasta and jars sauce, government procurement at its finest. He boiled water, heated sauce, assembled a meal that approximated Italian food the way paint by numbers approximated art. But it was hot and filling, and Lily ate without complaint, which was victory enough. After dinner, bath time in a bathroom that wasn't theirs, pajamas that had been hastily packed and already needed washing. Lily's bedtime story came from a book she'd read a dozen times, familiar enough that she corrected him when he tried to skip pages, then lights out her voice rising in the darkness. I miss our home. The simple statement landed like a blow. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, his hand finding hers under covers that smelled wrong detergent, different from what he bought in bulk at the discount store. I know, sweetheart. We'll go back soon. Will everything be the same? Another question, too complex for honest answer. Their apartment would be there, assuming his landlord hadn't already changed locks and disposed of belongings. But the neighborhood would feel different now, contaminated by knowledge of men searching and threats lurking. Mrs. Chen would ask questions. School would require explanations. Nothing would be the same, even if geography remained constant. Some things will be different, but we'll still be us. That's what matters. Lily seemed satisfied with this, or perhaps simply too tired to pursue further. Within minutes, her breathing evened into sleep's rhythm. Ethan remained on his bed watching her in the dimness. This small person who trusted him absolutely, despite his repeated demonstrations of fallibility. Eventually, he left her sleeping and returned to the living room where Claire had turned on a lamp, fighting darkness that felt less physical than metaphysical. She sat curled on the couch, a book open on her lap, but clearly unread. Can't focus either. Claire shook her head, closed the book, set it aside. The cover showed a beach scene, waves and sand, an escape into someone else's reality. Ethan lowered himself into the adjacent chair, body protesting movement after days of minimal activity. Delivery work had kept him physically occupied, if mentally exhausted. This enforced stillness revealed aches he hadn't noticed while in motion. Tell me something about your life, before all this. Claire's request surprised him. They had shared crisis but not histories, facts about circumstance but not details of personhood. He thought about what to offer, which pieces of himself might be worth revealing. I wanted to be an engineer when I was younger. Liked taking things apart, figuring out how they worked. Got a job at the manufacturing plant straight out of high school. Thought I'd work my way up, maybe take community college courses. Then Lily's mom got pregnant. We weren't ready. Hadn't been together long. But you adapt, right? Or you try to. What happened to her, Lily's mom? She left when Lily was 4 months old. Couldn't handle motherhood, or me, or both. Left a note saying not to look for her. I never did. Do you hate her? The question was more complex than its simple construction suggested. Ethan had cycled through hatred, anger, grief, acceptance, and back to anger over the years. His feelings about Lily's mother existed in layers that shifted depending on his mood and how difficult that particular day had been. Sometimes. Mostly I just don't think about her. Lily asks occasionally, and I tell her that her mom loved her but wasn't ready to be a parent. I don't know if that's true, but it's kinder than saying she abandoned us. You're a good father. I'm trying. Most days I feel like I'm failing. That's how you know you're doing it right. Bad parents never worry about whether they're good enough. Claire's observation carried the weight of experience Ethan didn't ask about. Instead, he turned the conversation. What about you, before Cascade Technologies? Before all this, Claire's expression shifted, nostalgia mixing with loss. She pulled her knees to her chest, arms wrapping around shins, making herself smaller. I grew up in Eugene, middle-class family, nothing special. Did well in school, went to University of Oregon, got a business degree because I didn't know what else to study. My parents wanted me to be practical, marry someone stable, have grandkids they could spoil. I wanted more but didn't know what more looked like. So I got an apartment in Portland, found the executive assistant job, and told myself I was building towards something. Were you building towards something? I thought so. The job paid well. I had friends or people I thought were friends. I dated occasionally, nothing serious. I was comfortable. Comfortable is dangerous. Makes you think you've arrived somewhere when really you're just paused between disasters. The cynicism in her voice suggested hard lessons learned. Ethan understood that tone had employed it himself when circumstances stripped away optimism and left only wariness. Do you think you will go back? To that life, Claire's laugh held no humor. What life? I have no joy, no apartment, no car, no friends who answer calls. My parents haven't spoken to me in 5 years, long story not worth telling. Even if this ends with arrests and vindication, I'm starting from zero. Less than zero because now I'm the whistleblower everyone knows about. Good luck getting hired when you're famous for exposing your employer's crimes. Maybe there are organizations that help people like you. Witness protection, relocation assistance, something. Maybe. Or maybe I end up exactly where I was before Ethan Cole decided to give a stranger a sandwich. Homeless, hungry, invisible. The bitterness in her voice was earned but still difficult to hear. Ethan wanted to offer reassurance, promises that everything would work out, that courage would be rewarded and justice would prevail. But empty platitudes felt insulting when directed at someone whose circumstances had systematically destroyed any basis for optimism. For what it's worth, I'm glad I gave you that sandwich. Even knowing everything that came after, I'd do it again. Claire looked at him, her eyes searching his face for evidence of deception or pity. Finding neither, she nodded slowly. That might be the kindest thing anyone's ever said to me. They sat together in the lamplight, the safe house settling into night sounds, refrigerator, humming, heater cycling, the distant sound of traffic from streets that belonged to people with normal problems. Ethan felt exhaustion pulling at consciousness, but resisted, unwilling to retreat to a bedroom that wasn't his, in a house that felt like waiting room for a future that might never arrive. Eventually, Claire stood, stretching muscles that had been stationary too long. I should try to sleep. Tomorrow might bring news. Or not. Either way, I'll need energy. She moved toward her room, paused at the threshold, looked back. Thank you, Ethan, for everything. I know you didn't ask for this. I know I've destroyed your life along with my own. But thank you. Before he could respond, she disappeared behind her door, leaving him alone with thoughts that refused organization. He remained on the couch staring at nothing until his body finally demanded rest he couldn't defer. The second bedroom, his and Lily's, smelled of detergent and strangers. He slipped into bed beside his daughter, felt her automatically curl against him in sleep, and stared at a ceiling that told him nothing about what morning would bring. Sleep arrived in fragments, disturbed by dreams where men in suits chased him through buildings with infinite hallways. He woke repeatedly, checking his phone's blank screen from habit, before remembering it was powered off. Time lost meaning in darkness, minutes and hours blending, until morning light finally leaked through inadequate curtains. Day 3 in the safe house dawned with Lily asking if they could go outside just for a little while, just to feel sun that didn't come filtered through glass. Ethan had to explain again why that wasn't possible, watching her face collapse into disappointment she was too young to hide effectively. Claire emerged looking worse than the previous day, her eyes sunken from lack of sleep or excess worry. They assembled breakfast in silence, each person trapped in private thoughts that couldn't be shared without spreading infection. The phone agent Torres had provided remained silent. No updates, no news, no indication that the world beyond these walls still turned. Ethan felt time becoming elastic, stretching into shapes that made measuring impossible. Was it morning or afternoon, yesterday or today? Everything blurred into waiting. Around what might have been noon, Lily asked if she could draw. Ethan found paper and crayons in a cabinet safe house standard issue, apparently, and she settled at the kitchen table, creating artwork that showed a house with 3 stick figures visible through windows. One large figure, one medium, one small. Family improvised from crisis. He watched her draw with the unself-conscious focus children brought to tasks they considered important, and felt something break inside his chest. She deserved better than this. Better than government custody, anonymous houses, fear bleeding through adult facades. She deserved childhood play with friends, birthday parties, summers, doing nothing because nothing was exactly what summer required. Instead, she was drawing them as prisoners, while men who committed fraud walked free, erasing evidence by erasing people. The injustice of it made his hands clench into fists, anger-seeking target but finding only helplessness. Claire noticed his expression, understood without explanation. She moved to stand beside him, her presence offering solidarity rather than comfort. Agent Torres said 48 hours until arrests. That was yesterday morning. So by tomorrow this could be over. We could go home. Her voice carried hope she didn't believe, optimism manufactured for his benefit. Ethan appreciated the effort even while recognizing its hollowness. And if they don't arrest anyone, if the investigation stalls or the evidence falls apart or something else goes wrong, then we've been in hiding for nothing, and we have to figure out next steps from a position even weaker than before. The honesty was refreshing, if unhelpful. They stood together, watching Lily draw 2 adults who had stumbled into guardianship neither asked for but couldn't abandon. The afternoon stretched forward like road through featureless terrain. Destination uncertain journey, tedious. Evening arrived with the suddenness of winter light failing early. Ethan prepared dinner chicken from the freezer rice that cooked to gummy consistency vegetables from cans that tasted like their containers. They ate with television providing background noise, a news program discussing politics and weather, and everything except the corporate fraud that had destroyed multiple lives. After dinner, after bath time and story time and lights out, Ethan and Claire reconvened in the living room, their nightly ritual of shared wakefulness in a house that demanded vigilance. Do you think tomorrow will really bring arrests? Claire's question echoed his own thoughts. Ethan had no answer beyond speculation, but speculation was all they had. Torres seemed confident. The evidence is solid. They know who's involved. It's just logistics now warrants coordination, making sure everyone can be picked up simultaneously so nobody runs. And if someone does run, then it takes longer. But they still get caught eventually. Money leaves trails. People make mistakes. It might not happen tomorrow, but it happens. He hoped that was true. He hoped justice operated with the efficiency Agent Torres's confidence suggested. But he had spent enough years watching rich people evade consequences, while poor people drowned in them, to trust that virtue alone guaranteed victory. They talked until exhaustion finally demanded surrender, then retreated to separate rooms and sleep that came unwillingly. Ethan lay beside Lily, listening to her breathe, and wondered if morning would bring resolution or simply another day of waiting, while the world decided their fate without consulting them. Morning arrived with knocking at the door, sharp and insistent, startling all three occupants from sleep. Ethan checked the window, saw Agent Torres and three other agents and FBI windbreakers, their faces serious but not panicked. He opened the door and Torres entered, with an energy that suggested news. Everyone gathered in the living room, Lily still in pajamas, clutching her bear, sensing that whatever came next would be important. We executed arrests this morning. 6 executives from Cascade Technologies, including the CEO and CFO, all taken into custody without incident. They're being arraigned this afternoon on federal charges of wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. The evidence from Claire's files is solid. Prosecutors are confident about convictions. The words landed like rainfall after drought, relief so profound it felt physical. Claire's hands flew to her face, covering emotions too large for expression. Tears leaked between fingers, and her shoulders shook with sobs that sounded like laughter, if laughter could be heartbroken. Ethan felt tension he hadn't recognized drain from muscles that had been clenched for days. He pulled Lily close, kissed the top of her head, and allowed himself to believe that maybe finally this nightmare might be ending. What happens now? Can we go home? Torres nodded, her professional facade cracking slightly to reveal satisfaction beneath. You can go home. We'll maintain some surveillance for a few days, make sure there are no threats from associates we haven't identified yet. But the primary danger has passed. You're free to resume your lives. Free. The word felt foreign concept, too abstract after days of constraint. Ethan tried to imagine returning to their apartment, to Lily's school, to his delivery route, assuming his job still existed. The future that had seemed impossible now stretched before them, ordinary and precious, and terrifying in its normalcy. Claire would need to testify eventually, Torres explained. Grand jury first, then trial if the case went that far. But with the evidence and multiple defendants, plea deals were likely. Most of it would happen without her needing to appear. She would have her life back, or at least the opportunity to build a new one. They packed their few belongings, Ethan moving with efficiency born from years of managing limited resources. Lily helped folding clothes with more enthusiasm than skill. Claire moved slowly, as if afraid sudden movement might shatter this fragile victory. Within an hour, they were in a government vehicle being driven back toward the neighborhood they had fled days ago. The city looked different now. Brighter, less threatening, just buildings and streets rather than maze of danger. Ethan watched familiar landmarks pass, feeling something like home calling him back. The van stopped outside their building. Agent Torres handed Ethan a card with numbers to call if anything seemed wrong, reminded them surveillance would continue for another week, then left them standing on sidewalk with bags in hand and future uncertain, but finally their own. They climbed stairs to the 4th floor, Ethan's keys feeling strange in his hand after days without using them. The door opened onto their apartment untouched, exactly as they'd left it in panicked flight. Lily ran to her bed, throwing herself onto familiar blankets, hugging stuffed animals she'd been forced to leave behind. Claire stood in the doorway, hesitant as if entering how, without emergency, felt like trespass. Ethan gestured her inside him. You'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow we figure out next steps. But tonight you're safe. We all are. She entered slowly, closing the door behind her, and for the first time since appearing in his bathroom, her face relaxed into something approaching peace. The first morning back in the apartment, Ethan woke to the smell of coffee brewing, a luxury they hadn't indulged in for months. He found Claire in the kitchenette, fully dressed, hair damp from the shower, standing before the two-burner stove, with an expression that mixed determination and uncertainty. I bought groceries. Early this morning. The corner store opens at 6. I used money from the FBI's Witness Compensation Fund. They deposited it yesterday. Not much, but enough for basics. She gestured toward the counter where bags sat, unpacked contents visible. Eggs, real butter, fresh bread that hadn't been marked down, oranges that still carried the waxy shine of recent harvest. Ethan moved closer, his mind calculating, feeling the familiar anxiety of stretched budgets, then remembering that for once someone else had shouldered the burden. You didn't have to do that. I know, but I wanted to. You fed me for a week, let me return the favor. Her voice carried a firmness he hadn't heard before, the sound of someone reclaiming agency after days of being protected, sheltered, stripped of autonomy. He recognized the need beneath the gesture and nodded acceptance. Lily emerged moments later, her internal clock accurate despite location changes and stress. She saw the groceries, saw Claire cooking, and her face lit with uncomplicated joy. She climbed onto a chair, chin resting on folded arms, watching with the attention she usually reserved for cartoons. Are you making pancakes? Claire glanced at ingredients, improvising without recipe. Something like that. We'll call them pancakes and hope they cooperate. The meal that emerged 20 minutes later bore only passing resemblance to pancakes, too thick, slightly burned at edges. Sweetness coming from apples chopped and mixed into batter rather than syrup they didn't have. But they were hot and made with care, and when Lily took her first bite, she declared them the best pancakes ever, and Ethan couldn't dispute the claim. They ate together at the folding table, morning light filtering through windows that no longer needed curtains drawn. The absence of threat felt strange, like missing tooth the tongue kept probing. Ethan caught himself listening for knocks at the door, scanning the street through peripheral vision, waiting for the other shoe to drop despite Agent Torres's assurances. Claire cleared plates with practiced efficiency, then turned to face him, hands gripping the counter edge. I need to find a place to live. I can't stay here indefinitely. You've done enough. The statement was practical, obvious even, but it landed harder than Ethan expected. Over the past week, the three of them had formed something resembling family bonds forged in crisis that felt real despite their artificial origin. The thought of Claire leaving, of returning to the two-person unit he and Lily had been created, an emptiness he couldn't quite name. There's no rush. Take time to figure things out. The FBI compensation won't last long. Maybe 2 months if I'm careful. I need to find work, but who's going to hire me? Every background check will show that I was fired, accused of theft involved in a federal fraud case. I'm toxic. Her voice remained level, stating facts without self-pity, but Ethan heard the fear underneath. She had exposed criminals and been vindicated, but vindication didn't erase digital footprints or repair destroyed credit or convince employers that hiring her wouldn't bring complications. Give it a week. Let things settle. You testified the arrests happened, the news cycle will move on. In a week, we'll have better perspective. Claire looked like she wanted to argue, but Lily's voice interrupted from where she sat, drawing at the table. You should stay with us. We have room, and Daddy needs help because he's always tired. The child's logic was irrefutable and embarrassing. Ethan felt heat rising in his cheeks, while Claire's expression shifted towards something that might have been amusement. Your daddy manages just fine, but he'd manage better with help. Mrs. Chen says it takes a village. Are you part of our village? The question hung in the air that suddenly felt charged with meaning beyond a 6-year-old's understanding. Claire's eyes found Ethan's, asking permission or offering escape, he couldn't determine which. Let's take it one day at a time, he said, finally answering both of them, committing to nothing while leaving everything possible. The morning progressed with Ethan making calls he had been avoiding. His supervisor at the delivery company answered on the 4th ring, voice curt with irritation that bloomed into something uglier when Ethan explained his absence. Family emergency doesn't cut it, Cole. You're supposed to call in, not disappear. I've got a business to run. Your route's been reassigned. I understand. I'm ready to come back. Tomorrow if you need me. Silence stretched while his former supervisor decided whether to be magnanimous or petty. Pettiness won. I'll put you on the substitute list. If someone calls in sick, I might have work. No promises. The line went dead before Ethan could respond. He set the phone down, absorbing the reality that his employment had just downgraded from precarious to nearly non-existent. Substitute list meant maybe 1 or 2 days a week if luck favored him, which it rarely did. Rent would come due in 11 days. He had enough saved to cover it barely, but the following month looked like free fall. Claire had been listening from the couch, her expression suggesting she understood exactly what the conversation meant. That's my fault. No, that's capitalism. Workers are disposable. I knew that before you showed up. This just accelerated the inevitable. What will you do? He had no answer that didn't sound like whistling past graveyards. Find other work, stretch savings, sell belongings. The usual strategies of people for whom poverty was persistent condition rather than temporary setback. He shrugged, letting the gesture carry what words couldn't. The afternoon brought Mrs. Chen knocking at the door, her arms loaded with containers of food she had somehow known they would need. She embraced Lily, then Ethan, her eyes finding Claire with the assessment of someone who missed nothing. This is the woman. Her question carried no judgment, only curiosity and concern that grandmothers specialized in. Ethan made introductions, watched as Mrs. Chen studied Claire with intensity that would have been uncomfortable from anyone else. You've had a hard time, it wasn't a question. Claire nodded anyway, accepting the observation without elaboration. Miss Chen set down her containers, began unpacking food with the authority of someone who had decided this kitchen was now under her jurisdiction. You eat, all of you. Too thin. And you, she pointed at Ethan, you look like you haven't slept in weeks. Just a few days, actually. Same thing. Tonight you rest. Tomorrow we make plans. But first food. She wouldn't accept argument or gratitude, simply laid out a meal that smelled like childhood and comfort, then insisted they eat while she watched. Only after confirming they had consumed sufficient quantities did she leave, but not before extracting a promise from Ethan to call if they needed anything. That woman is terrifying, Claire observed after the door closed. She's the best person I know. The praise was simple but absolute. Mrs. Chen had been more family than neighbor, more support than his own relatives who had scattered after his mother's death and never bothered reestablishing contact. She had kept Lily safe when he couldn't have fed them, when money ran short, had asked for nothing in return, except that he be the father his daughter deserved. Days folded into each other with the strange quality of aftermath, where events that had seemed monumental diminished into stories told rather than crises survived. Claire found a rhythm in the apartment, contributing where she could without overstepping boundaries that remained unspoken but understood. She cleaned with the fervor of someone grateful for tasks that created order from chaos. She cooked with ingredients purchased from her dwindling compensation fund, preparing meals that stretched protein and vegetables into quantities that fed three, with enough left for Mrs. Chen when she visited. Lily attached to Claire with the ease children demonstrated when adults proved trustworthy. She would sit beside her while doing homework, asking questions that ranged from math problems to why the sky changed colors at sunset. Claire answered with patience that suggested she found the questions welcome, rather than burdensome explanations, careful enough to educate without condescending. Ethan found himself watching them together, feeling something shift in his chest that he couldn't quite identify. Warmth mixed with fear, hope tangled with warning that getting comfortable was dangerous when circumstances remained fundamentally unstable. Claire had nowhere else to go, was staying from necessity rather than choice. Mistaking gratitude for something deeper would be foolish. But then she would look at him across the small apartment, and her eyes would hold an expression that suggested her calculations might be equally complicated. A week after the arrest, Agent Torres called requesting Claire's presence for grand jury testimony. Federal prosecutors were building cases against all 6 executives, and her first-hand account was crucial for establishing timeline and intent. The session would take most of a day, Torres explained, but Claire would be compensated for her time and provided transportation. The morning of testimony, Claire emerged from the bathroom wearing clothes borrowed from a thrift store 2 blocks away, pants that fit poorly, a blouse that had been professionally pressed decades ago, shoes that pinched but looked presentable. She had attempted makeup applying it with the uncertainty of someone whose supplies had been lost to circumstance and whose confidence had been stolen by events. "You look fine," Ethan assured her, meaning it. "I look like someone wearing a costume of what professional used to mean. You look like someone who survived something terrible and showed up anyway. That's more impressive than any suit." She smiled, the expression still fragile but increasingly frequent. He wanted to hug her, offer physical comfort to accompany words, but uncertainty about boundaries kept him motionless until she closed the distance herself, arms wrapping around his waist in an embrace that lasted longer than casual and felt like promise of something neither was ready to name. Then the FBI vehicle arrived and she left, and the apartment felt cavernous in her absence despite its actual size remaining unchanged. Ethan took Lily to school, returned home, and found himself unable to settle. He cleaned already, cleaned counters, organized possessions that didn't need organizing, checked his phone repeatedly for updates that hadn't arrived. The substitute list yielded no work calls. His savings account balance mocked him with its inadequacy. Rent was due in 4 days. He calculated and recalculated, trying to stretch money that refused to stretch, considering which bills could be delayed and which would result in service disconnection. By the time Claire returned that evening, exhaustion painted across her features. Ethan had worked himself into a state of anxious paralysis. She collapsed onto the futon, kicked off the borrowed shoes, and closed her eyes. "How did it go?" Her answer emerged after a long pause. They asked the same questions 17 different ways. Wanted every detail, every document, every conversation. "My throat hurts from talking, but the prosecutor seemed satisfied. Said my testimony was compelling." Whatever that means. It means you did what you needed to do. She opened her eyes, studying him with focus that made him want to look away. "You're worried about money." The observation was statement rather than question, accurate enough that denial felt pointless. He nodded, accepting that she had learned to read him in ways that bypassed words. "Rent's due Friday. I have enough, barely. But next month looks bad. The substitute list isn't generating work. I need to find something else, but delivery driving is what I know. And every company has more applicants than positions." Claire sat up, her exhaustion visibly warring with determination. "The FBI compensation includes a stipend for housing assistance. For witnesses who lost their homes because of testimony. I didn't apply because I was staying here, but I could. It would cover my share of rent for 6 months while I look for work. We could split on, make this arrangement official instead of temporary." The proposal landed with weight that transcended financial logistics. Splitting rent meant commitment, meant planning for shared future rather than limping through shared present. It meant acknowledging that whatever was happening between them had substance beyond crisis-induced proximity. "You'd want that. To stay here officially, where else would I go? I have no family, no friends, no prospects." But more than that, she paused, choosing words carefully. "I want to stay. With you and Lily, if you'll have me." The vulnerability in her voice matched his own uncertainty. They were two people damaged by circumstance, bound by unlikely sequence of events, attempting to construct stability from materials that felt insufficient. It should have been obvious, disaster relationship doomed by impractical foundation. But Lily adored her, and Ethan found her presence had become essential in ways that transcended logistics. She made coffee the way he liked it without being told. She knew when he needed silence and when he needed conversation. She looked at Lily with genuine affection that wasn't performance for his benefit. She had survived circumstances that would have broken many people and emerged with compassion intact. He crossed the small distance between them, sat beside her on the futon that had hosted so many difficult conversations, and took her hand. "I'd like that, us figuring this out together, whatever this becomes." Relief flooded her face, followed by something that looked like hope, finally permitted to exist without immediate contradiction. She leaned against him, her weight familiar and welcome, and they sat in silence that felt less like absence of words and more like understanding that exceeded language. That weekend, they rearranged the apartment with the seriousness of people claiming spaces as theirs rather than his. Lily's bed moved to create more distinct separation. Claire's belongings still fitting in a single bag, but growing as she slowly acquired necessities found designated locations. The bathroom accommodated a second toothbrush hairbrush, the modest cosmetics she purchased with FBI funds. Mrs. Chen visited, assessed the changes with eyes that missed nothing, and nodded approval. Good, everyone needs family, blood or chosen doesn't matter. She had brought more food noodles and dumplings prepared with the expertise of decades, and they ate together, four people around a table meant for two, but managing somehow the crowding feeling less like imposition and more like abundance. Lily asked questions with her usual directness, trying to understand the shifting dynamics of their household. Is Claire staying forever? Ethan and Claire exchanged glances, neither certain how to answer. Finally, Claire spoke, her voice gentle. I'm staying for a while. We'll see how it goes. Is that okay with you? Yes. Lily's enthusiasm was unqualified. Now we're a real family, like Emma has. She has a mom and a dad and a brother. We have a Deb and a Claire. That's almost the same. The logic was six-year-old perfect categorization that ignored complexity in favor of simple truth. People who lived together and cared for each other constituted family regardless of legal or biological relationships. Ethan felt his throat tighten, emotion pressing against composure. That night after Lily slept, he and Claire sat together on the futon that had become their evening ritual space. The apartment settled around them with its familiar sounds, no longer threatening, but simply present. Thank you for this, for giving me somewhere to belong when I had nowhere. Claire's gratitude felt unearned. He had simply responded to crisis in front of him, made choices that felt inevitable rather than heroic. But her hand found his in the dimness, fingers interlacing, and the gesture carried meaning that transcended gratitude. I gave you a sandwich and let you use my bathroom. You gave me back hope. Seems like you got the worst deal. She laughed quiet enough not to wake Lily, and the sound carried genuine warmth. I'll try to make it worth your while. The words hovered between joke and promise, and Ethan felt his heart rate accelerate. They had been carefully avoiding the obvious tension between them, the awareness that circumstances had forced proximity, but something deeper was developing beneath forced intimacy. Now with danger past and future opening before them, pretending seemed increasingly difficult. Claire. I should tell you, she turned toward him, and whatever he had been planning to say evaporated when her lips found his. The kiss was tentative questioning, offering escape if he wanted it. Instead, he pulled her closer, answering question with affirmation, and the careful distance they had maintained collapsed. When they finally separated, both breathless, she pressed her forehead against his. I've wanted to do that for days. Wasn't sure if you felt the same. I've been terrified of feeling the same. Because wanting something doesn't mean it's wise. Wisdom is overrated. I tried being wise. Followed rules, kept my head down, made safe choices. Look where that got me. She had a point. Safety had proven illusory wisdom, insufficient protection against circumstances beyond control. Maybe recklessness disguised as courage was the only sensible response to a world that punished caution and bravery with equal indifference. They kissed again, longer, deeper years of loneliness and fear, dissolving into connection that felt both terrifying and inevitable. Eventually they separated, aware that Lily slept mere feet away, and some boundaries deserved maintenance. But they remained close, Claire's head on Ethan's shoulder, his arm around her waist, both adjusting to the reality that their relationship had just become something they could no longer pretend to ignore. The following weeks brought slow stabilization. Ethan secured part-time work at a warehouse overnight shifts that paid slightly better than delivery driving and came with the promise of full-time hours if he proved reliable. The schedule was brutal, 10 at night until 6 in the morning, sleeping while Lily was at school, waking in time to collect her from Mrs. Chen. But it was income, and income meant survival. Claire found remote work doing data entry for a company that asked few questions and paid little but provided structure and purpose. She worked during Lily's school hours, then transitioned to helping with homework and dinner preparation. The domestic rhythm they established felt simultaneously fragile and surprisingly durable, routines building on routines until their life together developed texture that resembled normalcy. Lily thrived in the stability. Her drawings shifted from houses with stick figures looking out windows to houses with stick figures playing outside, subtle indication that her sense of safety was rebuilding. She talked about school with enthusiasm rather than obligation, brought home projects she was proud of, asked if Claire could come to the parent-teacher conference scheduled for next month. The question created awkward negotiation about roles and boundaries, But eventually they decided Claire would attend with Ethan, presenting as family unit that might confuse teachers, but satisfy Lily's understanding of who belonged in her life. 2 months after the arrest, the first trial began. Claire had to testify publicly, her face broadcast on local news, her story dissected by defense attorneys paid to discredit her. Ethan took the day off work to attend sitting in the gallery, while Claire described discovering the fraud, documenting evidence, losing everything when she tried to do the right thing. The defense attorney was young, aggressive, trying to establish reasonable doubt by suggesting Claire had fabricated evidence after being legitimately fired for poor performance. But the prosecutor had prepared her well, and she answered each question with calm precision that suggested truth required no embellishment. The jury deliberated for 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. The first executive would serve 7 years in federal prison, more trials would follow, and Claire's testimony had been pivotal. Walking out of the courthouse, reporters shouted questions and cameras flashed, but Ethan kept her close, navigating through crowd until they reached his van. Inside, doors closed against chaos, Claire began to cry. Not from sadness, but release. Emotion, held back for months, finally permitted expression. Ethan held her while she shook, offering presence because words felt inadequate to the moment. "It's over," she whispered finally. "It's really over. Not completely." More trials waited, more testimony required, but the outcome was no longer uncertain. Justice, imperfect and delayed, was happening. The people who had destroyed her life would face consequences. The evidence she had risked everything to preserve had mattered. That evening, they celebrated with pizza ordered from the place that offered Tuesday specials, soda instead of water, cookies from the bakery that Lily loved. Small luxuries made meaningful by context. Mrs. Chen joined them, bringing ice cream and wisdom dispensed through stories about her own life's hardships overcome. After dinner, after Lily went to bed, Ethan and Claire stood on the apartment's small balcony, accessible through the window. The city sprawled before them, lights marking where millions of people navigated their own struggles and triumphs, most unknown to each other, all connected by the simple fact of shared geography. "What happens now for you?" Claire leaned against the railing. Portland's night air cold enough to see breath. "I don't know. Finish testifying, keep working, figure out what comes next. Maybe eventually I'll feel like myself again, whoever that is." "Do you regret it, all of this?" She considered the question seriously, not dismissing it as rhetorical. "I regret that it had to happen, that people I trusted turned out to be criminals, that doing the right thing cost me so much. But I don't regret the outcome. I stopped them. They'll pay for what they did. And I found you, found this. That has to count for something." Ethan moved to stand beside her, their shoulders touching, warmth shared against cold. "It counts for everything." They stood together, watching the city until cold drove them inside, back to the apartment that had become home to the life they were building from salvaged pieces. Nothing was certain. His job remained precarious. Her testimony wasn't finished. Their relationship was too new to guarantee durability. But uncertainty had lost its terror. They had survived worse. They would survive whatever came next. In bed that night, Lily, between them because she had requested their company, and neither had the heart to refuse, Ethan stared at the ceiling and allowed himself cautious hope. The future remained unpredictable, but for the first time in years, unpredictable felt like possibility rather than threat. Beside him, Claire's breathing evened into sleep. Beyond her, Lily dreamed whatever children dreamed, her bear tucked close. And Ethan, exhausted delivery driver who had once given a stranger a sandwich, closed his eyes and rested. Morning would bring its own challenges. Bills would come due, work would demand attention. Life would continue with its usual blend of difficulty and grace. But they would face it together, this improvised family born from crisis and sustained by choice. Outside, Portland slept and woke in cycles that paid no attention to individual stories. But inside 320 square feet of rented space, 3 people who had found each other against all odds breathed in rhythm, and that was enough. The past had been survived. The present was being lived. The future remained unwritten, which meant anything was possible. Impossibility, Ethan thought, as sleep finally claimed him, was all anyone really needed.